There are so many facets to our shared experiences and close connections. Indeed, the lives of our peoples themselves are more intertwined than ever before.
It started quietly, as royal scandals often do. Not with loud declarations or public leaks, but with whispers that passed nervously from aide to aide. At Windsor, there were sudden silences in hallways where once there had been chatter. At Balmoral, a chair sat empty during a gathering, and no one dared to ask why. Even the Queen's most trusted advisors tightened their lips when her name and the subject of her will were mentioned in the same breath. Something was being hidden, and the palace was desperate to keep it buried. For the world, everything seemed simple after Queen Elizabeth II's passing. The official will was read at the ceremony. Royal lands were distributed in a way that looked respectful. Jewelry was passed down according to tradition, and the institution wrapped itself in the image it knew best: order, stability, continuity. It was exactly what the public expected from the monarchy. But behind those heavy palace doors, the truth was entirely different. According to multiple insiders, what the world saw was only half the story. The Queen had prepared not one will, but two. The public version had been curated, softened, and polished for the cameras. The other, quietly signed in her final months, was real, raw, and devastating. This hidden will, insiders say, left almost everything of true personal value to Catherine, Princess of Wales. It wasn't just pearls or portraits, it was estates, heirlooms, jewelry that had been symbols of royal women for generations. Even private letters and diaries that carried the Queen's own words were entrusted to Kate. What mattered most was not what Catherine gained, but who was excluded. Camilla, the woman now crowned as Queen Consort, had been written out. The effect was more than financial. It was symbolic. It was Elizabeth, in her final act, making a choice about who she truly trusted to carry her legacy forward. Camilla's absence from the will wasn't an oversight. It was intentional. To those who saw it, the message could not have been clearer. Elizabeth never fully accepted Camilla. Her trust had always been with Catherine. When Camilla discovered the truth, the palace shook. It wasn't revealed to her through ceremony or lawyers, but privately, by Charles himself. He returned from a closed-door legal review, pale and silent. When he finally told his wife, the reaction was explosive. Insiders described screams that rang through Clarence House. Camilla accused Elizabeth of betrayal, of plotting one last insult from beyond the grave. She shouted at Charles, accusing him of weakness. One aide claims she smashed a crystal glass against the wall, her voice echoing through the corridors. Even Charles, long accustomed to her temper, was left speechless. For Camilla, this was more than a rejection. She had spent decades clawing her way from public disgrace to reluctant acceptance. She had endured being branded the villain in Diana's story, surviving years of scandal, hatred, and whispers that she would never be worthy of the crown. And yet she persisted, finally standing beside Charles as queen. To her, this should have been the ultimate validation. But Elizabeth's hidden will had ripped that validation away. The silence in the document spoke volumes. No personal letter, no symbolic jewel, no acknowledgement at all. For Camilla, it wasn't about diamonds, it was about dignity. And Elizabeth had denied her that dignity entirely. Kate, meanwhile, had been caught in the crossfire without warning. She had never sought this position. She had never asked for this fight. But when William revealed the Queen's sealed note to her, Catherine wept. Those who have seen the letter describe it as deeply personal. The Queen praised Kate's loyalty, her quiet strength, and her ability to carry the weight of duty without complaint. Elizabeth expressed her belief that the crown would be safe if guided by Catherine's values. For Kate, the words were overwhelming. She never wanted to take from Camilla. She never wanted to spark a new royal war. But she now found herself standing at the center of one of the monarchy's most combustible controversies since Diana. William, too, felt the gravity. He reportedly sat in silence for hours after reading the details of his grandmother's final instructions. He told an aide that this wasn't about jewels or estates. This was Gran letting the world know who she believed in, he said. He knew the truth. In a family where trust was rare, Elizabeth had given hers to Kate. Camilla, however, could not let go. She paced for hours, shouting at staff, demanding to know if this had been planned all along. One insider recalls her saying bitterly, "She smiled at me while handing the crown to the girl behind my back." The girl was Catherine, the very person Elizabeth had quietly chosen to carry her spirit forward. That night, Camilla reportedly broke down, sobbing to her staff that she was never good enough for the Queen. "No matter what I did, I was never enough," she cried. For those who had always seen her public face of confidence and control, it was startling. Behind the title of Queen Consort was a woman undone by rejection. The palace moved quickly to contain the damage. Staff who knew about the will were silenced with non-disclosure agreements. Lawyers who had overseen the Queen's private documents disappeared from public view. Within 48 hours, an emergency meeting was held with senior advisors from Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Kensington. The mission was clear: bury the will forever. The official story painted Camilla as fatigued and unwell. Kate and William's sudden absence from engagements was explained away as family time. The Queen's public will was reinforced as the only version. But the cracks were already showing. Princess Anne, who rarely engaged in palace politics, was said to be disturbed by the cover-up. She had seen the Queen's private will before the funeral and had accepted it as her mother's personal choice. But watching Camilla's rage and Charles's silence unsettled her deeply. For Anne, it wasn't about theatrics. It was about honesty. Charles himself remained quiet. Some believed he was paralyzed, torn between his mother's wishes and his wife's humiliation. Others suspected he was orchestrating the cover-up, determined to shield Camilla from further shame. But no amount of secrecy could erase the truth. The Queen's choice had been made, and those who mattered most already knew it. She had entrusted her treasures, her words, and her legacy to Catherine. In the weeks that followed, a subtle but unmistakable shift began to take place. Royal engagements that had once been organized around Charles and Camilla were redirected toward William and Kate. Briefings reserved for a Queen Consort began landing on Catherine's desk. Humanitarian initiatives, Commonwealth visits, and protocol matters were quietly introduced to her. It was as if the Queen's decision was reshaping the monarchy in real time. Public opinion began to reflect the same shift. Polls showed a surge of support for Kate. Social media overflowed with admiration, comparing her composure to Elizabeth's. One viral comment captured the sentiment of many. "She didn't ask to be queen, but she already is." For Camilla, the change was unbearable. Though she still wore the crown in title, her absence at major events became more frequent. Her sudden withdrawals from public life only fueled speculation. To many, it looked as if Elizabeth's hidden will had quietly crowned Catherine, not with ceremony, but with trust. Kate and William maintained silence. They refused to feed the storm. There were no interviews, no pointed leaks, no public feuds. Instead, they carried themselves with quiet dignity, even as the weight of the Queen's choice hung heavy over them. Behind palace doors, Catherine carried not just jewelry and estates, but the responsibility of a legacy she had never asked for. Elizabeth's decision was not about material things. It was about values. She had lived through wars, divorces, scandals, and betrayals. She had endured the heartbreak of Diana, the scandal of Andrew, the rift of Harry and Meghan. But through it all, she recognized in Catherine something rare: grace under fire, loyalty without complaint, strength without vanity. If anything, what happened after the Queen's hidden will surfaced was even more volatile than the moment Camilla first erupted. Because while her fury burned behind closed doors, the palace machinery was already grinding into motion, desperate to smother the flames before they reached the public. Staff members who had been present at Clarence House that evening later described the atmosphere as suffocating. Senior aides rushed from office to office with sealed folders. Mobile phones were confiscated for security reasons. Even long-serving staff who had survived decades of palace intrigue whispered that they had never felt tension quite like it. It wasn't just another royal scandal. They all understood instinctively that this was a turning point. For Camilla, the days following her outburst were some of the darkest of her royal life. Outwardly, she forced the same polished smiles. Cameras captured her waving politely, standing beside Charles, cutting ribbons, and nodding through ceremonies. But those who worked closest to her saw the cracks. She grew restless, snapping at aides over minor mistakes, pacing late into the night, muttering that the Queen had set her up to fail. Her once steady confidence had been replaced with paranoia, a gnawing belief that everyone around her was whispering about the will whenever she turned her back. Charles, for his part, was torn. To the public, he appeared steady, maintaining the royal calendar with his usual restraint. Yet insiders say he retreated further and further into silence. He spent long hours alone in the gardens at Highgrove, walking the paths his mother once loved, his head bowed. He confided to one confidant that he felt as if he had been placed between two immovable walls, his mother's legacy on one side and his wife's wounded pride on the other. No matter what he did, he feared he would betray someone. Meanwhile, William and Kate found themselves living under an invisible weight. Adelaide Cottage, their home near Windsor, became a retreat not of luxury, but of heavy quiet. William tried to shield Kate from the worst of the palace whispers, but he couldn't stop the subtle changes already unfolding. Invitations that once went directly to Camilla were now arriving at Kensington Palace, addressed to the Princess of Wales. State advisors who had always briefed the Queen Consort were discreetly redirecting their notes to Catherine. Kate herself never spoke of it publicly, but aides noticed her long silences, the way she would sit by the window at night, staring into the garden while William tried to comfort her. She had never sought the spotlight, never craved the power games of the monarchy, and yet by the Queen's hand, she had been pulled into the heart of its most dangerous storm. The Queen's decision was about more than inheritance. It was about trust. For decades, Elizabeth had watched family members stumble under the weight of expectation. She had seen Diana destroyed by the institution's merciless glare. She had seen the chaos of Harry and Meghan's departure. She had endured the scandal of Andrew and the exhaustion of Charles's troubled path. Through it all, she had searched for someone who carried not just the title, but the discipline to protect the monarchy's dignity. And in Catherine, she found it. Unlike others who had married into the family, Kate never sought to change the crown for her own image. She accepted its sacrifices. She carried its weight without complaint. She understood the silence it demanded, the composure it required. For Elizabeth, who had lived her entire reign guarding the institution's survival, that meant everything. The Queen's private letters to Kate, which insiders say were also included in the will, painted this picture vividly. In one note, she reportedly praised Kate's ability to balance motherhood with duty, writing that, "The Crown will one day thank you for raising not only children, but heirs who understand both the privilege and the burden of their destiny." These letters, now in Kate's possession, were more valuable than any diamond. They were the Queen's voice, speaking from beyond the grave, shaping the future. But if they were a gift to Catherine, they were a knife to Camilla. Because while Elizabeth had left her words of wisdom to Kate, she had left Camilla nothing, not even acknowledgement. And in a world where symbolism is everything, that absence spoke louder than any insult. The palace communications team worked overtime to bury the truth. Carefully worded statements were fed to the press. Camilla's absence from engagements was chalked up to seasonal flu. Kate and William's retreat was explained away as family time with the children. But journalists weren't blind. They noticed the unusual silences, the canceled appearances, the shift in public tone. Some tabloids even ran speculative headlines, hinting at tensions behind palace walls. Most were quickly pulled after firm phone calls from royal press secretaries, yet the whispers continued. Among the public, speculation grew. Support for Kate swelled as she carried herself with quiet dignity, refusing to engage in the storm. Her popularity soared in polls, with many noting how she mirrored Elizabeth's grace and composure. Social media lit up with comparisons between the two women, painting Catherine as the new Elizabeth in waiting. Camilla, by contrast, faced a different tide. For years, she had fought to shed the label of interloper, of outsider, of the woman who could never live up to Diana's shadow. And though she had made progress, Elizabeth's secret will had undone much of it in an instant. Suddenly, every move she made was scrutinized, every expression dissected. Was she ill or simply humiliated? Was she pulling back from public life or being pushed aside? Within the palace, the divide grew sharper. Some aides privately sympathized with Camilla, believing the Queen had dealt her a cruel final blow. Others saw the will as a moment of clarity, a necessary act to ensure the monarchy's survival through William and Catherine. One long-serving courtier reportedly remarked, "Her Majesty always thought in centuries, not headlines. She saw who could carry the crown for the next 50 years, not the next 5. And so, while Camilla fumed in private and Charles drifted into melancholy, Kate became the quiet center of gravity. She did not seek it, but it came to her nonetheless. The monarchy has always survived by burying its darkest truths. Wars, affairs, betrayals, each covered, silenced, or reframed until history could polish them into something less dangerous. But Elizabeth's hidden will could not be erased so easily. Too many had seen it. Too many knew. And the symbolism it carried was too sharp to be dulled. The Queen had chosen her legacy. She had chosen Catherine. And even though Camilla may wear the crown, the people, the staff, and the spirit of Elizabeth's reign had already shifted their gaze elsewhere. For Kate, it was a crown she never asked to wear, but one she could not refuse. And for Camilla, it was the reminder she feared most. Titles can be inherited, but legacy must be earned. In her final act, Elizabeth entrusted those qualities with her most personal possessions, quietly crowning Catherine as the woman to embody the monarchy's future. Camilla may hold the title, but Catherine holds the Queen's blessing. And within the royal family, that blessing carries more weight than any crown. No cover-up, no press statement, no display of anger could undo it. The Queen had spoken from beyond the grave, and she had chosen Kate.